Welcome to Belmont Poetry Night. I'm Monica Korde, your host and the Poet Laureate of Belmont, California. We meet on the third Tuesdays of every month to celebrate the spoken word as makers, listeners, and admirers of poetry. We come with featured guests and an open mic, inviting readers of all ages. After gathering for several years at our favorite physical venue, the Belmont Library, since the pandemic, our thriving poetry circle has transitioned to this virtual space, and I'm grateful this allows me to welcome poets and listeners from across the globe. It's lovely to see you all. The Zoom room is always brighter with your smiles and your presence, and I appreciate it so much. So, thanks everyone for joining. Beginning with our poetry night tradition of sharing where you are joining me from, I invite you to post in the chat name of your city, state, and country, any place that you would like to put in. You're zooming in from this evening. So, please continue sharing and thank you again for being here. So, moving on, tonight we gather under the theme Sound Map, the science of poetry, to explore how poems trace rhythms, pauses, and patterns that mirror the world around us. As you know, every poem has its own heartbeat, its pauses and stresses and music. And when we bring in a scientific lens, those rhythms, those poetic patterns, the prosody of it start to look a lot like natural patterns that we already know, whether it's the tides or the waves, the migrations, or the seasons that we have witnessed and experienced throughout our lives. So basically, poetry and science, side by side, are both teaching us how to listen. And in curating this evening, my hope is that we are guided into a space where listening closely reveals the subtle, scientific, and living undercurrents within the language, the very currents that give poetry its life and pulse. And speaking of poetry coming alive in the world, this week started on a bright, promising note. Most of you have heard the news. We have a new US Poet Laureate. Uh, Yay for that. Just yesterday, the Library of Congress announced the appointment of Arthur Z. as the 25th US Poet Laureate consultant. Isn't that a brilliant bit of news? I think I'd like to take a moment to share a bit about Arthur Z. He's a highly acclaimed poet, and his work draws inspiration from philosophy, from science, and from nature. And he's a second generation Chinese American who's also served as the Poet Laureate of Santa Fe back in 2006. And what I personally am excited about is that he's also a translator, and that during his term he plans to have a special focus on translating poetry originally written in other languages. So, with this news, I was thinking that even with so many uncertainties surrounding us, the one constant that poetry is alive, that the arts is thriving through its makers, is something that truly offers a comforting reassurance. So, as we gather, I hope all of you feel the same way. And in that spirit, and in honor of our newest US Poet Laureate, Arthur Z., I'll open the evening with one of his poems, which I feel is a quiet meditation of life. Here, here, a snail on a wet leaf shivers and dreams of spring. Here, a green iris in December. Here, the topaz light of the sky. Here, one stops hearing a twig break and listens for deer. Here, the art of the ventriloquist. Here, the obsession of a kleptomaniac to steal red pushpins. Here, the art of the alibi. Here, one walks into an abandoned farmhouse and hears a tarantella. Here, one dreamed a bear claw and died. Here, a humpback whale leaped out of the ocean. Here, the outboard motor stopped, but a man made the island with one oar. Here, the actor forgot his lines and wept. Here, the art of prayer. Here, marbles, buttons, thimbles, dice, pins, stamps, beads. Here, one becomes terrified. Here, one wants to see as a god sees and becomes clear amber. Here, one is clear pine. Thank you. I love the layering in this poem. You must have noticed it too. And what's fascinating about this piece is how, like a scientist, Z catalogs all kinds of phenomena: a snail, an iris, a whale, even marbles and dice. And each observation feels precise and almost like a scientific notation or field notes. Interestingly, I was reading about Arthur Z, and he began writing poetry while sitting in a calculus lab at MIT, a moment that led him to transfer to UC Berkeley to follow his passion. And you will find that observations on human condition with ecological observations seamlessly into the rhythms and textures of his poems are blended in, inviting us to notice the small alongside the large, the ordinary alongside the extraordinary. And I also wanted to bring focus on how structurally the poem is built on anaphora, where each line begins with here, and that repetition creates a kind of rhythm and gives it a pulse, a cadence of expansion and contraction, like breath or tide. So, sonically, you can hear the play of soft consonants and then these sudden stops which echo the textures of the natural world itself. So yeah, I really love how this poem marks a point of discovery, of attention, and transformation. And from Z's attention to the small and extraordinary, I'd now like to turn your attention to our guest poet this evening, whose work similarly asks us to slow down, notice, and enter a world where language itself is alive with observation and discovery. While most of you here are already familiar with her work, it is my absolute delight and honor to welcome and introduce my beloved poet, friend, and colleague, Lisa Rosenberg, as tonight's featured artist. And here's her intro. Lisa Rosenberg is the author of A Different Physics, winner of the American Legacy Book Award for Poetry, as well as essays spanning travel, science, and memoir and satire. A former space program engineer trained as a physicist, her work has been recognized by Jurassic Leonardo Residency, Wallace Stegner Fellowship, and Mosaic America Fellowship. In 2017-2018, she served as Poet Laureate of San Mateo County and began multi-genre and cross-disciplinary teaching and speaking. Her writing appears in venues such as Plume, Terrain.org, Poetry, The Common, Threepenny Review, Amsterdam Quarterly, and numerous anthologies. So excited to have you with us, Lisa. A warm welcome to you.
Monica, I'm really honored to be here, as well as just, I feel like I'm in such warm company. Um, Belmont is one of the places where I kind of reestablished my life in poetry in connection with other people during Tanu's laureateship in that welcoming fireside poetry circle. And then Jackie Rigoni and now you have all continued that. So it's really delightful to be here and to be reading kind of in this continuum of voices that you bring together. So just, big gratitude for that.
Thank you, Lisa, for sharing that. And you are one of the first poets from the circle that started with in Belmont. So welcome, and such a joy to have you here.
As some of you or many of you might know, Monica and I co-host a different reading series. So it's also been my great pleasure to be a co-journeyer in hosting other voices. I so admire what Monica has created here with the conversation as well as the open mic and the readings. And I feel like because you're in the next term of your laureateship, the next year of your laureateship now, just to recognize the journey here, because I think we met in Jackie Rigoni's at her kitchen table, sharing poems.
Yeah,
And what a long, beautiful trip and strange.
absolutely. Yeah, you never know when and how paths cross. And it's so amazing that poetry helped us and intersected uh, around our journeys so beautifully.
So I'll go ahead and start in with a few poems, and I know Monica has offered some very thoughtful questions for discussion. I'm going to read both from new and older work, both from a different physics and from what I am overjoyed and yet restrained to announce is my next book, which has just been accepted by a publisher whom I cannot publicly announce yet, but it will be out this spring. And the title is Weeds and Stars. No less scientific than a different physics, but perhaps less explicitly titled. Um, and I couldn't be more thrilled to have something come out on a shorter timeline than than the first book, and in a more pressing time when we need as many voices and as many ways of connecting and opening our ways of thinking and seeing. So the first, I'm really going to intermingle the poems from both collections because there is a lot of overlap in the concerns, although I think that formally, structurally, and in terms of the way our voice and our sensibilities grow and continue to expand and change, that's something that I'm still in the midst of experiencing and processing. So I'll go back and forth between the two collections. The first piece is called Sunflower. And like many pieces in the new book, it's a compound word that has been divided into its two parts with a comma in the middle. And this began as an ekphrastic project led by Cynthia Patton, Livermore Poet Laureate, in response to a cyanotype close-up of a sunflower. Sunflower. The center of anything has work to do. Bearing, spinning, taking things in, sending them out again. Pupil and iris, axle and hub, the dense, dark center of our gathered stars, swathed in what light it hasn't swallowed, dragging bright dust in arced scarves. Aster to aster, disk to disk, the way a word begets a world. Say inflorescence. Say one bent petal rests on the rim, a tear, an inflection. Say the mind travels there. A foot explores the unexpected curve. This next piece, if that one went large, the next piece goes smaller and specific. The first piece was a prose poem. This next one is a very short free verse about one of my favorite fossils. Archaeopteryx. Perfect as Nike. Head bent, feathers arrested, the imprint of upturned wings, a likeness to wonder at. Your last flight, dear prototype. Thank you. Love seeing the virtual responses in the absence of sound. This next piece, and then we'll, I think, move into Monica's first question. This next piece is an example of, patience and what people like to call multitasking. Having part of a poem, as it turns out, the first part, arrive almost fully formed, and then waiting, I thought it would be a year, then it turned into 2.5 for the time to complete it, to listen for the rest of it. Dear neighbor, Jupiter or Venus, whoever you are, low on the horizon, upstaging the stars, about to slip behind the roof and tree line. This post-solstice, after the storm, bare night. No moon to obscure you. No clouds, no glass between my eye and your light. The lucid glint of our shared star, casting back from your face through gas and dust and vast quiet spaces where names fall away. No matter the era, the hour, or which imperfect deity the ancients assigned you, or how we strive to alter solitude. You ride your arc at home with all entanglement, distinct, atmospheric, untouched as yet by war, steadfast along the center-seeking path of our kindred orbits, our hidden cores.
Such beautiful opening poems, and such compelling ones as well, Lisa. Uh, Firstly, congratulations on your second book of poetry. Yay! Really can't wait to hear more about it, and hold that book and have it in possession whenever it's ready and it's time for it to be out in the world with all of us. But going back to the poems that you opened with, Lisa, I love how they ground us into the poet's vision and rhythm almost immediately. And especially the one that you opened with, Sunflower. Um, I remember the line it begins with, the center of anything has work to do. It's such a luminous meditation on centers of all kinds, whether it's cosmic or bodily or linguistic, and you just weave that in so beautifully. And I love the vivid imagery, and it's so immersive, even with the urchin poem that you shared, and the next one after that as well. That image rich poetry that we have, along with the sound that comes through, and that brings me to my question. But before that, also going back to uh, one of your essays that I had come across, I'll read a brief excerpt from those. It was The Poetics of Discovery, where you write that poets may select from the rules of language as well as from sound patterns and fixed or received poetic forms like the villanelle or the ghazal or the blank verse, and they can listen for the wisdom and body knowledge inherent in physical words and rhythmic modulations, which are prosodic or melodic, visual and tonal. They might even experiment outside of their aesthetic preferences. And with that in mind, in your poems, where every word and sound carries weight, you sculpt the soundscape with remarkable economy to achieve profound impact. I see that sound in your poetry serves as a nuanced map of inner experience, guiding meaning itself. So, as an opening thought, my question is, when tracing a poem's sounds and spaces, how do your choices of form guide the creation of their sound map, whether it's spatial flow or pauses or sonic textures?
Um, I want to come back to what you said about mapping inner experience also. Um, but I write primarily by ear,
Mm,
and I really strive to incorporate sensory imagery, not strictly visual imagery, because there are so many other kinds of imagery, even though the word image is usually tied to the visual. Um, so I write by ear, which usually means, for me, rhythmic patterns and um, assonance and consonants, and things kind of arrive, or I'll hear the pattern. I mean, maybe this comes from starting tap dance when I was 4 or something, but um, the rhythmic pattern arrives usually with, in language, and it might just be a fragment. It might be more. Sometimes it's tied to an image or idea, this kernel of a poem. And the the thing I immediately do is listen for what
mm,
follows, and try to be in a receptive mode of making,
mm,
where I am receptive to what can arrive.
mm,
And part of that is building out your antennae and your containers, and having really varied models, whether they're linguistic, scientific, cultural, spiritual, having a lot of models that you will draw on, whether consciously or not.
mm,
It just kind of, the more you have, the more possibilities there are, especially for combining or straddling them in
right.
fruitful ways. But I will start with that kernel, and then now, now meaning say the last say 8 years or
Mm,
so, I will really work and see if it fits with the prosodic form.
mm,
And the one that I kind of apprenticed myself in for about 25 years was pentameter,
mm.
because it's kind of like saying, well, if I'm going to dance, I should be able to pirouette. I'm just gonna I'm gonna work on it until I can do that. Whether or not I ever do ballet, it doesn't matter. I know I'll learn something.
I like that
So
analogy.
I think my natural rhythm is more of a 4-beat line, not a 5,
Right.
um, which which is said to be more like the earlier English verse forms and earlier eras of English. But so I'll work in a form or in a blank
Mm,
verse type, not necessarily an entire form for an entire poem,
mm,
but a form for lines or maybe syllabics or something. And that will help me not fall into a predictable pattern
mm. That's so
and help
interesting.
me find things, discover things. And all along, you're assessing, does this fit or not? Do I want to keep going along this route? Maybe not, but I might find some fabulous things along the way and some things that seem fabulous but aren't. So it's really, starting out with some kind of skeleton or musical framework.
Mm,
It's rhythm and musicality is really the kind of the guide, as well as associative leaps in, making these kind of connections between ideas ideas is really the word, even though I try to avoid speaking in abstractions, but concepts. Um,
Right.
you know, even our categories for things are conceptual, right? So, um, and objects, whether living or not living, are often the launching points for these poems. You
Mm.
mentioned the beginning of Sunflower, and that was a group project with a deadline,
Mm.
which is, the next hardest thing is an occasional poem with a deadline. But a group project with a deadline, I finally found a piece of, all the artwork was fabulous, but I finally found a piece that I thought I could really, respond to
Mm.
in poetry. And then I just kind of waited, and which we had the luxury to do. We're no longer, court poets on strict orders and strict penalties. But the line, the center of anything has work to do, came
Mm.
to me in the middle of the night when I was having some insomnia. And I always felt, of course, like the household is swirling, and it was kind of late pandemic. And, it's Sagittarius A star, but it's also mom.
Mm.
It's um and it's hurricanes and it's wheels, and even if a center appears to be still, it still is functioning in seen and unseen ways. So that line arrived, and
I love hearing that. Reminds me of something that Diane Mooney said long time back. She calls it a line that drops from the ceiling.
yeah, or crawls out from whoever where, but usually drops from the sky or the ceiling,
Yeah, it happens to
or
me
just
as well.
arrives, But then, because of all that, like, apprenticeship, things now um, come more easily in a prosodic verse form, even if they end up as a prose poem.
Hmm.
And when I look back on a lot of my free verse, which is the majority of what I've written, I can see how it's actually, a lot of those are fixed metrical forms that I was using line breaks then
Hmm.
for gesture and associative functions that I didn't know how to create otherwise.
Well, that's really illuminating and so interesting to dive deeper into this conversation, Lisa. Would love to know more, but let's hear a few more poems again before that.
So if we're talking about sound patterns, I'm going to read a couple of, these are all fairly short. The first one really was along these lines of, I see something compelling, and I'm going to see what I can do if I start with pentameter. Urchin. To be radiant, mobile, deliciously defended. To see with feet, to shy from light. To bear a crown for waist and wield a belly mouth with keeled teeth. To graze on opportunity. To stun or cluster in a hold of liquid sky. To sculpt the seafloor. To occupy a fivefold signature of bone. And then another sea creature, short piece from a different physics. Moon jellies. Animate in the backlit black tank. You fly. Lace-edged ghost bells propelled by such grace as I cannot match with my clumsy spine, my opacity, the aging truths inside me, unseen and unborn, stung by the fact of your eggs in arced rose, hot flower in a clear skull. Again, there, the vowel sounds really led me. Um, so this next piece is short, but it is a prose poem from a sequence, or not a, from a group called Herbarium Poems, which started with a sequence that was all from rural Greece and now has expanded to other places, especially California. This first one is Cobra Lily. And these are all short, about that long. And I'm delighted that Cobra Lily is in the current issue of DMQ Review, which just dropped a couple of days ago. Herbarium, Cobra Lily. You'd think nothing could unseat nasturtium. Then one upstart beats another out of house and home, and here we are, knee-deep in blades, waist-high in arched, flat-hooded flower sprays, still awash in orange. Gone, the saucer-fat leaves, the petalled embellishments for bread and cheese. But early sweetness earns its keep. Fierce hummingbirds descend for these keen mouths. Before spring springs, disarming us until the longer light sets in.
Those are really captivating and so evocative, Lisa. And yeah, I must apologize. I went ahead of myself a little while back and said I was referring to urchin, but and that poem has always stayed with me, I think, or I have visited it very often on the Poets of Science website where it has found its home right now. But what a beautiful piece that seafloor that you evoke with the urchin. I think it's the seafloor becomes the stage, and the way you work with language, it really transforms science and art into a shared landscape of beauty and wonder. And to me, it actually feels as if you are making the microscopic world feel alive and magnified once again when we look at the fivefold signature of bone, or in the herbarium you're talking about the saucer fat leaves, the petaled embellishments for bread. There's such intricate detail to it, and also that observation. And you've spoken about poetry offering us a fascinating lab, and a poet and geoscientist whom I was reading, Sam Illingworth, he said that poetry is a great tool for interrogating and questioning the world. And I see that your background bridges the scientific and poetic, two fields which are often seen as opposites. In your practice as a scientist poet, how do you reconcile or intertwine the precision of scientific inquiry with this emotional resonance of poetic sound?
Um, Before I answer that, I just have to say, I think the urchin and the bull thistle are both like, little, close to your heart. Maybe
They
it's the
are.
form. Yeah. And Sam edits Consilience, and he selected actually the title poem, Weeds and Stars, of my manuscript for their last, I guess, 2 issues ago on chaos.
Mm-hmm.
So that was exciting to be featured there. So
Wow.
I guess the answer is they're not really divided for me when I write. Um, they can be divided when you kind of come from the outside in, but from the inside out, they're both part of a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And um, our curiosity can be piqued by just about anything, right? And
Mm-hmm.
depending on our own sensibilities and our opportunities. So, if you're whatever enterprise you're involved with also comes into play. So, if you are working on a scientific or a technological project, it
Mm-hmm.
goes in that direction. If you're working in art, it may go in that direction or not. But when I'm writing, these really are explorations, inquiries, um, little journeys that have a shared set of tools of thought and some shared tools of craft. And those are like the meta tools, right? About observation and ways of questioning and being attentive to process, learning to be present in process, which for me, that happens more in the educators I've been fortunate enough to work with in art than in science, but it's equally important there. And then having those that kind of inner pilot that says step back or move in. So when it comes to things like rhythm too and tonality, there are many kinds of rhythm, right? And as an artist, you really want to modulate. And when you kind of start to notice that there are things to modulate besides physical rhythm,
Right.
tonal patterns, subject matter, thematic concerns. And for me, the kind of gestural arc. So I think you could hear a big shift probably in voice from the Cobra Lily poem. You know, it's less plaintive. It's a little more wry and curious and less self-effacing, perhaps. It's wanting less and saying more, maybe. I don't, through these herbarium pieces, I've really been able to find new kinds of voice or new ways
Right.
of finding my voice, so to me, that's exciting. I mean, they really come together in a poem like Space that's in a different physics, where I had two very different models come in, and language was the place where they could be together. And that's a piece where I wanted to talk about some really profound astronomical, cosmological insight, and instead it became very personal about, being like a prepubescent girl and then growing past puberty into a life in science. And the two models at the end were the kind of stellar life cycle where things condense and fuse, and um, human physiology, where, thoughts trigger emotion and then all these different cascades that happen physiologically. And the line there was hot interiors of, and I'm thinking hot interiors of stars, right? That's where the fusion happens. But it ended up being hot interiors of moments that meld thought to muscle and words to thought. And I never expected it to go there. Um, so that was about having those two different, what I've learned as a Feldenkrais practitioner. That was the somatic and so forth, and what I knew from you know physics, but coming together through my own experience as well as listening for the rhythmic and melodic patterns.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if I've answered this. Is a question that could fill books, of course,
no,
or
of course.
hours.
But yeah, it's so interesting to hear and powerful at the same time. And I love where you said that language is where both of these worlds can meet. And I see that how the language sharpens every image. And by image, again, not just the visual, but the sensory images as well that you bring in. And it makes everything so vividly immersive. I just love hearing all that interplay between observation and thought and the natural world, and it shows such mastery of craft, Lisa. I love the balance that you strike in there. Would love to hear a few more, and then we go on with the next set of questions.
Um, so I'll read three different pieces that again span both books, and there's again shifts in voice as well as big shifts in subject matter. Citrus, by which I mean the blossom, not the fruit, by which I mean the scent and not the sight, by which I mean nostalgia its sudden bite, as if a tree, a patio, a street, the way the concrete had a fragrance, the concrete and the asphalt and the quiet, tiny yards, because the windows and the curtains, because the timbre of a passing car, and how the dampness of the grass in which I meant to pause, or when the stippled light on stucco walls, because a slow forgetting, by which I mean the acrid with the sweet. So here's a piece from roughly the same era, same locale. This one again brings together more of the explicitly scientific, and I had no idea where it would go. Slide rule. Tool of elegance, of speed against a different meter, of a different day. A day you stepped out to suburbs and cars and the faithful hold of motor oil on hot asphalt. And orange blossoms, a sky ripe for the faint drone of airplanes. Their hulls designed with aligned precision and the fortitude of hand calculations, of penciled graphs, blueprints, and circle templates on an angled drafting board. Mechanical tools where mechanical telephone bells call through the plumes above crowded ashtrays and coffee rings on flecked formica. The desks in rows, the men in ties and shirt sleeves. I am almost there in my pixie cut and white shoes on family day. Agape at the dark control room, unaware of the beauty of logarithms, the fluid promises of computing, that this laminate rule will soon outlast its heyday. A burnished leather case, and all of us. There is war on the news. We are scaling the moon, and everyone I love is living or yet to be born. Thank you. That piece is really close to my heart. Started it when my mother found my father's slide rule and gave it to me. This piece, the last one I'll read before our next discussion, I actually started and completed, except for minor revisions, before A Different Physics was published, and I purposely kept it aside as a seed poem. I think it was started in 2014 by a photograph. Golden ratio. The graph and its axes, the frog on the graph, just landed on the soft pads of its golden toes, its golden back a mottled diagonal, far less than the gap from terrarium to table, smooth as the boxed blue legend, and the swell of red beneath the graph's lone curve. An area left for you to compute. It's all stitched up, thread thin and notched along X, along Y, those scars of truth, those vines toward a first hard fruit, toward spirals and scrolls of ageless ratio, indifferent to acts of measurement, to arts of definition and the gifts of statistics, my friend, those infinite distances of our making. I think even then in 2014, that kind of divisiveness and the divisiveness of quantifying others was becoming more and more a part of social, conversations, political and social.
Yeah. Uh, well, I'm really glad you had slide rule in there, Lisa. It is also one of my favorite poems, uh, and it is also in such stark contrast to the poems that you just read, the citrus. And could you remind me of the last poem that you just read? The title of it?
Golden ratio,
Golden ratio. Yeah, I
and it
think,
has a
I mean,
comma in the middle. Yeah.
okay. Thank you. Uh, for slide rule, when it mentions the pencil graphs, the circle templates, I love that it brings us in a space where your personal journey is there, or something of a very personal experience is there. And in one of your early interviews as the San Mateo County Poet Laureate, I think it probably that interview was part of that, where you shared that from an early age you were fascinated with design, with proportion and value and hue. And I was just thinking of that when I was listening to Slide Rule, and with the movement and the sound that goes into poems like Citrus or Golden Ratio. Speaking of prosody, it is often taught as technical, but many poets describe it as organic or even intuitive. So, as you inhabit the rhythm and breath of a poem as a living force, both on the page and when bringing it to life through your voice, as kind of a vocalist of poetry, I'll call you. We have all been listening to you for such a long period of time, and we all know or are familiar with the way you recite these pieces and bring them to life. My question is, do you approach the architecture of language as a structured design, or more as something fluid and evolving? And to add to that, given your role as poet laureate in the past, where you've also brought poetry to communities in lived and spoken ways, how does all of that shape your writing?
The question of received or predetermined structure as opposed to evolving, they're not two separate categories, right? So we can work in a received or predetermined structure and still not know what is going to happen or where things are going to end up.
True.
Um, we can take the same thematic concerns or the same impetus into different forms. That's one of the things I admire so much about the Hyben. And I think that's one of the next areas of experimentation and learning for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Sometimes I purposely work in a very, very strict form because I feel that if I don't, I won't have anything to say that I hadn't already thought of,
Mm.
and you want to be discovering things. If you're not discovering them, neither will your reader. That's so many ways to spin what Robert Frost said decades ago. Um, that said, we can still have these organizing principles, right? Um, just like, you can do scientific experiments without knowing the higher math. That doesn't mean you wouldn't find more and different things, perhaps, with the mathematics. And the math can precede the experiment, or it can be brought in to facilitate. Um, so things like metrical structure, for me, those are tools as well as organic forms. They are forms for language, which is a living organic thing, right? And forms of any kind, whether it's in language or martial arts, dance, music, sculpture, forms carry wisdom, and they carry somatic wisdom as well. And I think for me, also having spent many years in dance, I spent a lot of time listening for or trying to effect gestural information in the poem, the gestural wisdom. And that comes across usually as tone, but it can be what completely shifts a theme from, one course to another or brings things together. So I don't know if I'm answering every part of that question or not, but that's to say that sometimes structure is where I start, other times I bring it in. Um, the journey is rarely really neat and clean, and like the poem Space again, that was started as one poem, free verse. It ended up being one sonnet and one free verse poem at two separate pieces, because the thematic territory I was trying to cover was more than I knew how to hold or explore in one poem or even in one form. So, they serve a structure for me serves so many purposes. It's a set of guide rails. It's an organizing principle. It helps me find my way. It helps me make discoveries, stay out of the predictable. Um, it it humbles you, right?
Absolutely.
And also forms they're human invention, but they're not divorced from the physical world. They have their roots in rhythmic properties and um, universal patterns. So they're just very rich, and I think it's too easy to think of fixed forms as constraining. They take a whole lot of choices off the table so that you're free to spend your attentive energy on other things, right? Um, so it's
Absolutely.
also it can be very freeing and fruitful as well.
Yeah, I hear you. I personally love working with traditional forms or fixed forms for that reason. And there's so much freedom sometimes or discovery that you gain from doing that. So, yeah, thanks for sharing that, Lisa. We do have a time for a couple more poems if you'd like to share before the final question.
Yeah. Um, I am going to read, let's see, I think I'm going to read another short list poem. And there's one prose poem I was hoping to read, but I don't know if we have time for two. Do we have time for two?
Yes, go ahead, Lisa. Your poems are not too long. That's perfect.
The first one is called Affirmation. At least the vagaries of light, at least the undercurrent and the vivid braid of clouds across contrails. At least I thought of squirrel noise, at least a subtle pause in chainsaws and exhaust, at least rooftops, at least at peace with least of all and almost, at least the strangeness of kinders, at least the saintliness of paint, at least the swallowtail lingers, at least the fragrant eucalyptus bits to tame the compost heap. So list poems are also new for me at this point. And rather than read this longer prose piece, I think I will read um, a short, more ecological piece. State Route, Sunday. Old Glory over almond groves, over banks of idle tractors and hushed backhoes, over grapevines, power lines, and fallows. One windowless, whitewashed school bus, gutted, and the rolling flow of swift diagonals, the stone fruits, the nuts, the orderly saplings, the irrigation rows flooded with sun, distant cirrus, thin glare off hood and windshield, phone poles and cell towers where ages overlap. Praise the ride, the radio, and all we do not think to praise. Forgive the gas stations, their motley gatherings of lonely flags and lanky fan palms racing toward us like frayed oases where nothing will be slaked.
Thank you for closing with those pieces, Lisa. Such rich tactile imagery and the precise rhythm makes the natural world really pulse and shine in those pieces, especially this the ecological one. I love the stone fruits and the nuts and the irrigation, uh, all that comes through. And again, as an intellectually curious mind, I love how you bring attention to insight through all of this. So, getting to my final question, let me steer you towards something you've shared, and I quote: the more we talk about processes, that puts us in a discovery mode, like a poem, a piece of scientific work. These are processes of exploration which allow us to be in synthesis, which in one word, which is one word for insight. And you've talked about this before as well, just a while back while we were discussing the other things. Uh, and we've come to uh, understanding more deeply how poets and scientists alike are seekers of patterns. So, in relation to that, through your poetic engagement with ecological rhythm, writing from that unique lens, what insights or new ways of seeing do you hope to share with readers when translating natural patterns like migration or decay or bloom into your poetry?
Probably the patterns, as you said, and discovery, exploration, curiosity are the underpinnings, but it's really an enterprise. For me, the exciting enterprise is finding connection through curiosity. That is, I think, the kind of species wide task for us now is to level up, as the expression goes, our imaginative capacities, beyond the zero sum and beyond the
Mm,
division and beyond genocide and climacide and all the kind of destructive actions that come from not just narrow thinking, but narrow imagining,
mm-hmm,
which keeps our options for thought and action within this old and largely received scope. So I do think that tools of thought, tools of craft,
mm,
as they can help us expand our imaginative and attentive skills and energies, so that they are not work per se. We can cultivate these things, develop listening presence,
mm,
presence in process, um, and a willingness to experiment and fail, and also to loosen our fixation on outcomes as results. You know, um, what if an opening is an outcome?
mm,
Outcomes we still have so narrowly defined. They're usually fixes or solutions or utilitarian products. Um, Not that there's anything wrong with any of
mm.
those, but that can't be the whole set.
True.
And there needs to be room for, of course, the things we haven't imagined yet or are beyond our current thinking and skills. So whenever you practice an old art,
Mm,
you have all this wisdom that's not articulated in every era there for you. you're not going to exhaust it. So poetry is one place. I think mathematics is another, um,
Mm,
where, and certainly other art forms as well, and many sciences where you can play, you can experiment, you can expand your skills, and certainly your attentive skills. Learning that receptivity and being in a receiving mode is
mm.
not necessarily passive in a way that does not affect things.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
that's
don't want to sound so heady, but really, art and science and human enterprise, um, is about learning and continuing to follow our curiosity. And we have centuries of tools that we don't have to discard, but we can continue to build from there and build out and opening. So connection, synthesis, kinship, um, and connection's not infallible, of course. Where does it happen? In the connecting mind, and um, not every insight is going to lead to a great discovery, but again, that process of following and discovering can serve us.
mhm, absolutely, and so true, Lisa. Not heady in any way, but thank you for that clarity and depth you've brought to us tonight. To circle back to our new U.S. Poet Laureate Arthur Z, and to quote him, he says that the best poems communicate through sound and rhythm and musicality,
Yes.
and as you read and reread, the poem emerges. And Lisa, your poetry embodies this so fully. The spaces you create through rhythm and awareness allow us as readers and listeners to really return and rediscover each time something deeper. And I'm so grateful for the conscious presence your work brings into the room. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And I see that the little number on the chat there is ticking up, and I will delve into the comments and respond as I'm able. Thank you for those.
Yes, though there's a lot of love in the chat, and our theme tonight was held so meaningfully through this conversation, Lisa. And I was wondering if this would be the right moment to also let our audience know about your upcoming courses on prosody. I'll share a link to that, including other several links to your work. But please go ahead if you'd like to just speak a
Sure,
little bit
yeah.
about it.
I have three different teaching uh, things that are coming up. One is a day-long conference through San Mateo County, and I know we have some interested parties here behind that. Um, the Arts and Culture Conference, Arts and Education Conference, which is a full day on October 1st. I'll be teaching an interactive workshop presentation on arts education for systems thinking. So if you are an arts educator or know some arts educators who are local, Monica is going to put a link to the conference, which is a single day conference, um, in the chat. I'm really excited to be teaching a short form online prosody workshop with Left Margin Lit. So it's 2 Thursday evenings and at the end of October, the 23rd and the 30th. And we will delve into rhythm, pattern, tone, compositional tools, ways to expand your possibilities for working. And I encourage people who are also working in prose to attend as well. So that'll be a short form intensive workshop. And lastly, I'll be one of the visiting poets in Omnidon's Breaking the Bowl, which is a course in forms led by the fabulous David Cohn. And I'll be there on October 26th, which is the first meeting, and it's a four Sundays series with Omnidon.
Perfect.
Thank you,
Yes.
Monica. I appreciate that.
No worries. It's always a pleasure, Lisa. But before we close and move on to our open mic portion of the evening, I'd like to give the audience a quick minute to share a word with you. We may not have time for audience questions, so I request everyone to post them in the chat for Lisa to read later. But please go ahead and share your thoughts and joy with her, and also look out for the links to her poems as well as all the upcoming workshops and readings.
Yeah, there'll be a public reading at Burlingame Library October 8th with an open mic.
Well, Lisa, I just wanted to say, as usual, I'm fascinated and so impressed with the combination that you so deftly use with art and science. And I also wanted to just quickly comment that I appreciated your saying something to the effect, I hope I didn't get it wrong, that experimenting uh, experimenting and failing is okay. That's a paraphrase. I'm sorry about that, but I think I got it basically right. Anyway, that's very inspiring, I find.
I feel very
Yeah.
privileged to have grown up with that being modeled.
I'd like to say just how intricate and I it just feels like sometimes your poem they feel like shells, like nautilus shells with just different parts that are interacting, and everything is so compacted, like a pressed diamond almost. And I think your voice is very unique. I mean, I try to read as much as I can, and so obviously I don't read enough, but I haven't come across many people who write in the style that you're writing. So maybe you know more about that, and you can tell us where if you got some influences. But yeah, but it's just really a pleasure to listen and hear you speak, bring it to life, by speaking it. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis. It's hard to overstate how much that means to hear. Lots of influences, living in past.
Okay, then thanks everyone. Sorry, was anyone trying to speak?
Yeah, I was just going to respond to what you were saying, that I know you have a lot of influences. We all have a lot of influences, but to bring it to this point of where you are, it um it just doesn't seem like it seems like you're really at a very high plane, without much imitation. I guess. I wish I could say that better, but you know what I mean.
Well, thank you all. And once again, thank you, Lisa, for honoring art, science, and technology with such informed vision. It was an absolute joy hosting you tonight and being in dialogue with you. And I really hope you enjoyed this reading experience as well.
I did. It's an immense pleasure to be able to craft the work, share the work, and it's very much, it's a longer discussion about, is the poem on the page or is it the oral temporal experience of reciting it? I tend to think of it more as sheet music and then the song. And to read with others is where the work really comes to life. So I'm very grateful for this and to be in a room of such wonderful community.
Thank you. We have some spectacular readings and readers waiting for us on the open mic, and if you are with us till the end of the segment, I'd love to invite you again to offer us a closing poem. But I understand if you have to leave, we'll definitely go a little over tonight, considering we are starting the open mic a little late. But please take it easy and enjoy the rest of the evening. With
I will
that,
endeavor to stay on.
okay, thank you. All right. Well, with that, we are going to stop recording this segment. Those of you who are in the Zoom room, please stay online for the open mic segment of the evening. To the YouTube audience, thanks for joining in and hope to see you for next month's virtual Belmont Poetry Night. Good night.